Another week, boys, and another twid. This week in Democracy, Helldivers, you just got your first ever real taste of a nerf. I know, some of you are like, Cross, this is terrible, this is awful. How did they expect us to play? And this is where I come in and say, hey, this your first time? As a Destiny player, we have seen countless buffs and nerfs over the years. And unfortunately, Arrowhead just hit us with a pretty hefty nerf. Now, Paulstead actually came out, who is the CEO of Arrowhead, to address this head on, which I have to respect. Quote, we want to continue our trend of clearly communicating what's going on with Helldivers 2. So here's our detailed design thoughts around why we did balance changes to weapons the way we did, presented by Arrowhead's old-timer Patrick Lasota. Now in the blog post, Patrick states that he's the current head of product testing at Arrowhead and further expresses his desire for transparency with their players, and this involves the need for nerfs and buffs to keep the game entertaining over the course of its lifespan. He states, I have since the game release seen many who say don't nerf, only buff, and other similar ideas. However, as a designer, I can tell you this is not a great idea, but I understand where the sentiment comes from. All too often in the games industry, the core fantasy and what makes a weapon feel good and fun is ignored for the sake of balance. I believe players are scared of nerfs because it will ruin the fantasy of a weapon, ruin their fun. It is extra important to us to tread carefully so that we don't ruin fantasy and fun when we do nerfs. We hope you, our players, will tell us when we cross that line inadvertently. So yeah, I know, some PR talk here and there, guys. Listen, fellas, as someone who's played live games for years now, we have seen damage control from developers. Look no further than the state of the game from Destiny 2 last year, or Diablo and Blizzard with their first big patch leading up to the launch of Season 1. There are times where developers definitely shoot themselves in both feet. Today, though, I do want to go into detail, a breakdown of these nerfs, as well as the buffs. I want to talk about how things have changed in today's This Week in Democracy. Now, let's start with primary weapons. Many players complain that primary weapons are not strong enough to deal with all types of enemies. Patrick states that this is intentional. They want you and your teammates to strategically utilize your stratagems for certain scenarios, rather than rely on raw DPS from primary fire. Now, the most notable of these changes is the nerf to Breaker. This is the SG-225 Breaker Shotgun. Now, this weapon quickly rose to the top of the primaries as the meta pick for most players. Patrick states, it was, however, not necessarily better at making you succeed in a mission, and no real damage nerfs were warranted. Now, the team wanted to keep the DPS of the weapon high at close range, while also playing into the fantasy of the Breaker being a powerful automatic shotgun that bucks wildly as you hose down targets in front of you. So Arrowhead has increased its recoil and decreased its ammo capacity, going from 16 shots to 13. Now, is this nerf noticeable? Well, keep in mind, Breaker is still a very good weapon. It still does very good damage, especially up close, but yes, reducing the max size is noticeable. Something that I would complain about, especially when I'm getting swarmed with enemies, is the reload animation of Breaker. And what this results in is this weapon running out of ammunition very fast. It's not just the magazine size that gets hurt, it's the overall ammo that you have ready to expend that also got hurt, that being its total damage, considering that ammo inside of Helldivers 2 is limited. Now, as far as recoil goes, is the increase here noticeable? It's kind of strange because it is, but I feel like it's probably going to be more noticeable depending on your input. For instance, controller players, you're probably going to feel this a bit more rather than us here on mouse and keyboard. And for mouse and keyboard players, I would argue and say you may not even notice it unless you're just really dialed into Breaker and you've been using it nonstop. Again, the most noticeable thing about Breaker is, of course, its mag size being decreased. Now, this also takes us to the Punisher. Arrowhead actually buffed this weapon. It's a powerful pump shotgun, but as Arrowhead pointed out, it was being limited by its slow reload and fire rate. Surprisingly enough, there was actually a bug that affected Punisher that when you picked up ammo, you would literally only get half. Now, the damage per shotgun pellet was increased from 40 to 45, and they also increased total ammo capacity from 40 to 60, as well as the stagger force against enemies. Now, in our sandbox testing, we found that this was very strong against higher tier enemies. The pump functionality does still make it difficult to deal with swarms, though. I personally like to pair it with things like the Guard Dog Rover to help fend off waves of rank and file enemies, but overall, I think Punisher is a better option, especially considering they also patch the ammo, no longer halving when you pick it up. Now, this takes us to the Breaker Spray and Pray. Dude, this weapon would literally just tickle enemies. But Arrowhead states that Breaker Spray and Pray was intended to be an even wilder, more point and destroy version of the regular Breaker, something where pacing yourself would be even harder. Now, many complaints came out about this weapon, most notably that it just was not good for dealing with anything larger than a scavenger. But Arrowhead increased the fire rate from 300 to 330 rounds per minute, and its shotgun pellet per shot was brought up from 12 to 16. Now, does this mean this is better than the current Breaker? In our testing, testing, I think it just presents itself as another option. Clearly, even after this buff though, I would still take like pre-nerf Breaker over the Breaker Spray and Pray. How it compares though, both Breaker and Breaker Spray and Pray in the current sandbox. In my opinion, Breaker is still better than Breaker Spray and Pray. Now moving on to Railgun. Look, Railgun was like the go-to weapon, especially when dealing with automatons. Arrowhead states that it was vastly overperforming and how safe it was to use and how convenient it was, not requiring a backpack or assistance to be effective, and not requiring risk to take out even larger armor targets. So Arrowhead decreased the armor penetration in safe mode and decreased the damage against durable enemy parts. Now what this means is that in safe mode, guys, it is only capable of penetrating medium armor now, such as automaton scout walkers. It is also now ineffective at penetrating enemies with heavy armor, such as chargers and bile titans in safe mode. Now let me be clear, I always use railgun in unsafe mode, but now you have to use it in unsafe mode in order to do any damage to these enemy types. Now Arrowhead also nerfed ability to damaging massive body parts. So essentially now you have to aim for the head, as well as other weak points on enemies. Now in our testing, we still found that it's good against medium armor enemies, such as hive guards, which it can still one-shot. Anything above medium armor, this thing though is hot ass in safe mode. Fellas, don't use it in safe mode. Absolutely need to be playing in unsafe mode to make railgun usable. Now its shots just bounce off of charger armor now, and it takes significantly longer to kill bile titans. Honestly, you're better off just using stratagems to take care of these guys. Against Hulks, most shots just bounce off unless you hit them dead on in the eye. We're about to get to it, but you're actually better off just using the laser cannon when it comes to higher tier bot enemies. Now this also takes us to the laser cannon. All this nerf talk, man, let's get to something good. From Arrowhead here, laser cannon's initial design was to be that of a machine gun, but with infinite ammunition. However, players were disappointed by the lack of armor penetration. You damn right we were. So Arrowhead buffed the laser cannon's damage versus massive body parts and increased armor penetration and gave it better ergonomics to make it easier to stay on target. In our sandbox testing, this is the railgun replacement. It can deal with Hulks, it can deal with chargers. Yes, you do have to shoot in the armored back of the leg now to kill. It also deals with striders and most other armor enemies very well. It's fantastic at taking down bot tanks when hitting the vent in the back. It's good. It's substantially better than where it was before. So guys, if you're playing this weekend, I would suggest giving the laser cannon a go. Now this takes us to another buff, this one hitting the flamethrower. Arrowhead states that there were many complaints that the flamethrower felt a little too anemic, as it not outputting damage at a rate that is warranted by a weapon with a shorter range and large volatility, such as the flamethrower. So they increased flamethrower's direct damage by 50% per second. Guys, flamethrower is very strong. It will cook waves of rank and file ads, especially against bug enemies. It can even kill a charger with about 3/4 of the mag. Now this takes us to the shield backpack. From Arrowhead here, the shield backpack is safety at the expense of a backpack slot. Unfortunately, the safety offered by the shield backpack was a bit too great, essentially allowing you to ignore many mechanics that contribute to the fun of Helldivers, such as knockbacks, shockwaves, and giant explosions, obliterating you and your friends. So Arrowhead increased the time the shield needs before regeneration occurs if the shield is not broken. If the shield is broken, it will then take longer to regenerate than before, but still shorter than if it had not broken. Quote, to compensate for these extra times, the regeneration speed of the shield itself is near instant to max HP. Now in our sandbox testing, it takes roughly 11.44 seconds for the shield backpack to regenerate after going down. Pre-patch, this was roughly 6.36 seconds. So yes, it's quite the nerf. Now is the shield still good? Absolutely. But you'll definitely need to be a lot more conscious when that shield drops, considering you'll now have double that time before getting that shield back. Now this takes us to our 120mm and 380mm barrages. Arrowhead stated that these were originally designed to act as an artillery storm that would deny entry to a specified area while raining down a powerful onslaught of rounds on enemy groups. Now they have a longer active time than that of Eagle Strikes, but of course they're less accurate. Quote, they have however not delivered on the feel of being active much longer or the saturated area denial effect. They're also good at killing the piss out of your team, but Arrowhead has decreased their scatter area and gave them an extra salvo. In our sandbox testing, personally guys, I think these are still only really good for bug missions, primarily for taking out nests. In my opinion, I would still go with other stratagems, but it is an option and better than what it was before. Now Patrick closes out the blog post stating, I hope this gives you a greater insight into how we are thinking around balance and why we make the changes we have. Happy hell diving. Now outside of the blog post covering nerfs and buffs, we also got new planetary conditions. In the patch notes, we see planetary hazards active, followed by many planets now have additional environmental challenges that will appear at random while you are deployed, from from fire tornadoes to meteor showers and many more. Now, we played a little when this patch came out, and guys, no joke, these meteor showers, they don't mess around. If you find yourself in the wrong spot when this event starts, prepare to get pinballed around right before you meet death. Now, in other news, Taekwon has been liberated, which means mechs are here, fellas. This was actually shared out yesterday on Helldivers 2 Twitter, stating that this is not a drill. Our factories are under attack, halting all output. Helldivers have been deployed to liberate Taekwon, and the liberation began soon after. You guys have literally done it in less than a day. Now, with mechs being here, guys, we are going to be doing testing on this extensively, which is why we're not including the testing of mechs here. I want to see exactly what mechs can go up against, what it can take on. We will be showcasing that here in the next day, going over everything that our mechs can do. Now, on the topic of new stuff, we also got a new trailer showcasing the new Warbond called Cutting Edge that will be coming out next week on March the 14th. This Warbond will include a ton of new weapons and armor for Helldivers to get their hands on. Here are a few ones we know so far. For armor, we have the X series prototypes. That includes the X03 prototype 3, the X16 prototype 16, and the X00 prototype X. For our weapons, we have the LAS-16 sickle, which is a laser rifle that fires in short bursts. We also have the SG-AP Punisher plasma, which is a modified Punisher shotgun with exploding plasma rounds. We also have the Arc Blitzer, which projects an arc of close-range lightning that can be charged up to fire off powerful bolts. The G23 Stun, which is a new stun grenade. The LAS-7 Dagger, which is a secondary pistol that uses laser rounds. Now, along with these new weapons and armor, there will also be 3 new capes, player cards, and emotes for players to get their hands on. So guys, that is this week in Democracy. Again, we'll be covering mechs here very soon, going over it in detail. And as far as the new stuff next week, we'll be trying to unlock them as quickly as we can. And as soon as we do, we'll also be testing their lethality as well. If you're new to the channel, guys, stick around. We do a video like this every single week called This Week in Democracy, which covers the patch notes and other shenanigans that's happening inside of Helldivers 2. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.